This from Drunken Trooper on X. What on earth are Roma doing sacking Daniele De Rossi?
I don't think you have to be drunken to be asking the same question. Roma fans are pretty outraged by it, particularly on socials at the moment. Now, of course, it's a very delicate situation that they've not really handled that delicately. He was given in June a contract extension to 2027. So it seemed to suggest he was long term. They have had 4 games so far this season, 4 league games this season. They've not been terrible, actually. They've not been brilliant as well. Now, our good friend Nikki Bandini, she wrote a column for The Guardian this week saying, you know, De Rossi could be heading into a bit of trouble here. You know, it's not really clicked so far this season. There's a feeling that maybe Roma extended with him thinking, you know, there's a bit of stability after he did finish last season on the whole quite well. I mean, physically they fell off, but that was due to the composition of the squad. I think you can say it's something outside of De Rossi's control, but having been given a lot of player resource, it doesn't feel that he's maybe that close to finding the tactical answers. I think there's been such a profound change to the squad. How can you expect answers after 4 games? Now, I think you had the sort of uneven results that you would expect from that degree of player change, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think they gave a good account of themselves in the 0-0 away at Juventus. They did pretty well in that. They were seconds away from winning at Genoa at the weekend, and if they'd have won that rather than concede the equaliser to Divinta right at the end, I think it would be like maybe a harder deal to sack him. But of course, the most important thing, and the reason why people are so outraged, not just because of the lack of joined up thinking that there appears to be, and they've just
in the boardroom.
Yeah, and they've gone and employed a coach in Ivan Jurić, who I have a lot of time for actually for his work at Torino and Verona. But is he really the coach that's going to take them to the next level? And you know, he's available for a reason, I suppose you could argue. It's the fact that De Rossi is the most beloved player in the history of the club, apart from Francesco Totti. So you've got to be able to deal with it less clumsily than this.
I was going to say there was a way of doing it if you wanted to do it, and this was not it. But look, De Rossi probably has had, 0 input on the players that come in over the summer. Mm. These are all decisions that are made above him. And these clubs are operating on their own, irrespective of their coaches at the moment, a lot of them. They're buying players knowing that they can be fluid with whatever coach. There's a few clubs out there obviously buying players for specific coaches that they have, and you know, they identify the profiles that their manager looks for. But I think there's others just buying players for, you know, and it doesn't really matter who is actually handling them in terms of the style that they want to profess, which is deeply problematic. And I think they saw that. So I've seen a lot of people going, they spent all this money during the summer, they got all these players during the summer. It's largely irrelevant because they probably view it as like, these players can work with any manager. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be De Rossi. And that's the decision that they've come around to.
I just think it's... I don't know. They've put themselves massively on the back foot.
Oh, yeah. It's a PR point. It's absolutely brutal.
And to say that Jurić is like the silver bullet that's going to make you definitely get Champions League, you can't say that.
But I mean, the pressure it puts on him now, he has to be an amazing. Yes. Otherwise, you get the fans become even more volatile. They'll go, all right, you got rid of our club legend for this. Yeah,
you're right, and I think it's difficult sometimes when we're football supporters to separate big transfer spending in terms of release fees from how much the investment actually is. Because, of course, Roma have been tightening the belt for ages, mainly because they went out and went mad in the first summer under Jose Mourinho, and because they've been suffering financial problems for, the best part of a decade plus. It's the fact that you kind of create a pressure by going out and buying Dovbyk and Soulé. Not that they're bad signings. Far from that. I think they'll both work out and be really good for them at some point. But the public perception of that, as you say, David, is that they've spent over 100 million euros on players. But in reality, the money's come from somewhere, because you think of the expensive players that have come off the wage bill. So Lukaku, Smalling, Karsdorp, Rui Patricio. So those guys who they brought, Sule won't be getting paid anywhere near as much as them. Well, he's not getting paid anywhere near as much as them. If he wanted the money, he would have gone to Leicester, and he said, no, I'm not going to Leicester. I only want Roma. And he basically made the deal happen for less money than Juventus ideally wanted. So I think that they've still got a young team. I think that has a right to compete for the Champions League places and believe it can compete for them. But a right to believe it should be in there?
Yeah, two different things.
I'm not sure. He should have had more time, clearly.
This question from Aaron. Were Bayern Munich good or Dinamo Zagreb bad? Or a combination of the two? We're talking about the 9-2 scoreline on Tuesday night. Harry Kane was pleased, wasn't he?
It kind of felt like a penalty shootout at various points, didn't it? It's such an unusual game because there are so few occasions on which a 9-2 doesn't really tell you the story of the game. But it kind of leaves the bare score leaves out the bit where Dinamo Zagreb got it back to 3-2 within a few minutes of the second half starting. Now, if you think of the pressure that Bayern were under at that point, on the brink of absolutely shooting themselves in the foot, and the bit when the goals go in and you realise, and not surprising because there are a lot of Croatians and people descended from Croatian families growing up in that part of southern Germany, that you realise that a bit like, not quite to the same extent, but a bit like when Galatasaray played there in the Champions League last season, there are loads of people in the supposed Bayern sections who are supporting Dinamo Zagreb, and probably for the first time the players turn around and go, hang on, we're not completely on solid ground as we normally are at the Allianz Arena. So I think the way that Bayern got themselves out of that was very, very impressive. I think as well, David, you have to say that the blip was partly due to Manuel Neuer going off at half-time. It felt a slight disorganisation.
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. But I think, there's such a significant difference between football in Germany and football in Croatia. And I think this result also potentially underlined a lot of people's fears about the new Champions League format and such as well.
Yeah.
And that is kind of what I took from this game, as opposed to, who looked good or bad on the day. It was just a bit of a concern in terms of, the gulf there. And look,
the plus side is if you're Dinamo, you're going, well, we don't have to play them again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And look, Croatian football is deeply problematic and saddled with a lot of institutional issues as well, which would take a whole episode, I think, to get into. So this result wasn't really a surprise.
I think there's a little bit of like confirmation bias in there as well, isn't there? Because we look at that and we think, well, it's not told us anything that we don't know. But like Bayern have got loads of options coming forward, and I think particularly when the lesser teams, as David says, try to keep up, and you can't maintain that sort of effort for probably more than 70 minutes. And, maybe it will start to unravel at the end, and we'll see a few of those. I mean, you could argue, the way, as we were talking about in the main OTC, the way that Dortmund managed to overpower the Club Brugge side, who were better than them for a lot of the night in the closing part of that game.
They were top of their own league as well.
Yes,
so,
yes.
You
look at how it unravelled for young boys against Aston Villa, for example. I think David's got a good point there.
We're going to revisit this one a lot this season, put it that way.
Yeah, I think
during this Champions League format.
I think you might be right. But I also think, going back to what you were saying at the beginning, Dotun, I think the 2 is important. Because what was the first thing Harry Kane said after the game? Well, we're not gonna win anything defending like that against better teams. And he's got a good point, hasn't he?
It's the right mentality to have.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things to think. And we said from the very beginning that Kompany will not be the guy to fix the Bayern defence. And plenty of coaches have had a go. Let's see.
9-2, still 9-2 in my book.
It is.
And as you've touched on the Champions League format point, David, let's jump to this question from Carlos on email. After Rodri said that players in England are close to striking, due to being overworked. Is this something that's been touted in other European countries too?
Absolutely. Jules Koundé of Barcelona touched on it as well. And players will be talking amongst themselves, I think, at quite a serious level somewhat. And they'll be saying, okay, when do we actually do this? Like, what's the next step here? And they are very much within their right to do so as well. I think there's been a lot of changes being made at the very top that they haven't been asked about. They haven't really been consulted about.
And is it specifically the new Champions League format that's causing the excess of?
I think it's a considerable part.
Play.
I think it's a considerable part. But then I think you also look at other factors such as the integration of new international tournaments. Nations League wasn't a thing 5-6 years ago. Club World Cup is something that clearly the powers that be want to expand and grow, and essentially want to be a Super League. And not just a little mini break tournament. They're wanting to make that serious. So there's a lot of football being played, and there's a lot more that some people want them to play as well. Some people think they're perhaps not even not doing enough right now. They could do even more.
They're living the dream, aren't they?
Yeah.
Some people think.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
I mean, the Club World Cup feels like it will be the watershed for me. And I think the way that, there's now a logo for it. There's still not a schedule. And, this is a tournament that's less than a year away. And FIFA are not unaware, even FIFA can't be unaware of the fact that there's a significant pushback to it in the football industry. Maybe the clubs get to step out of it by saying, well, actually, maybe it's not going to make us enough money. Of course, Carlo Ancelotti said something to that end in public and then walked back out of it. But, what David was saying about Jules Koundé, having a word on that, I know they've talked about this extensively in the French squad, because we've seen Mbappe, Griezmann come in and talk about this, and Griezmann has said, well, look, actually, if you're going to make us do everything, maybe not just we want our views taken into account on future scheduling, but other aspects of the game, like the employment of VAR. Maybe this is a move towards players saying, we're going to have our say on everything if you're going to get us to accept that as well. So this is something that's all over the place at the moment as well. But I think what we have to be intensely aware of, and I've said this before, as football supporters, is what the authorities are hoping for is the usual wedge that separates the people who play the game and the paying public working in their favour. Because, of course, as you kind of hinted out there, there's always that impression that they're getting paid a fortune. What have they got to complain about? They're doing something that everyone would want to do. What are they complaining about? I like to eat pizza. I wouldn't do it 24 hours a day. I think there's got to be a sense that something is special, and not just for the players, but for the supporters as well. The fact is, however much you're getting paid, there is an amount that your body can take and no more. And what we are seeing already is increased, and this has been something in modern football for a long, long time now. There's been something in football for a long time. The physical demands of football now make consistency very difficult, nigh on impossible, really. How the players are getting through this, I really don't know. Will the players continue to get through this? Not by playing their best every game. And what we've got to ask ourselves while we're sitting here and going, well, they've no right to complain. They get paid a fortune. What are we paying for? What are we paying for in terms of the amount that we pay to get into stadiums, which is not getting any cheaper, and there are more games. Mm-hmm. We have to ask what we're being asked to pay in terms of TV subscriptions, which is not getting cheaper. And not just in this country, but in other countries, there are more fragmented, different subscriptions. So if you want to see all the football that you want to see, it is costing you a fortune. Are you seeing the quality of football that you should be seeing? No, I think we all know the answer to that. And are we being offered a discount on that? No. Because the bottom line is, the people who are running the game, they don't care about the quality of the game and don't even pretend that that's the case. All they care about is getting the product out there as frequently as possible. And that is the problem. And that is where the interests of the players and the interests of the supporters, which a lot of people think are separate, actually come together.
Yeah. Simon Barnes wrote in The Meaning of Sport that sport, to have any meaning, has to be three things: high quality, important, and competitive. Honestly, out of those three things, how many boxes are being ticked right now in football at the top level?
It's a great question.
Sobering thoughts there. And this question from Simon on Instagram: despite losing against Real Madrid, I was really impressed by Stuttgart's forwards Deniz Undav in particular. How did they manage to get him back on a permanent deal with seemingly little interest from any other club? Because he went from, was it Brighton?
Yeah, so he was loaned to Stuttgart from Brighton last season. Now, Roberto De Zerbi wanted to keep him. Deniz Undav said, look, I want to play. And in that really successful season, Undav went along a goal a start pretty much for most of the season. We said in the main show how important Seydou Guirassy was for them last season. With Guirassy going, they needed to do everything they could to keep Undav. Now, to explain, Simon, it wasn't really an open market for Undav. So they had an option clause to buy him Stuttgart, which they were clearly going to action from a very early point. It was somewhere between 20 and 25 million euros. And Undav said, well, I would love you to take up this option because I would love to sign for Stuttgart permanently. He's feeling really good there, scoring goals, ambitious project, good coach, gets in the Germany squad, of course, for the Euros, so it's all working for him. But Brighton realise, and Brighton are very canny, of course, Brighton realise that they have undersold their option. And what they have in the contract is they have a buyback option for slightly more than that. So let's, for argument's sake, I think it was around 23 million euros for Stuttgart to buy Deniz Undav at the end of the loan period. Brighton had a buyback clause for 25 million. So they're like, well, we're going to take you up on the purchase clause. And Brighton are going, the minute you do, we're going to buy him back. What are you going to do about that? And so anyway, because of this, nothing's happening for ages. There's like months of negotiation. Eventually, they pay somewhere approaching 27 million, a sort of compromise fee. So Brighton feel that they get a good deal out of it. Stuttgart feel like they're not completely getting their pants pulled down. And because of this very much bilateral negotiation, no other clubs can really get involved. Now, it may be that a lot of those other clubs are looking at it as well and saying, well, you know, he's had one season in an absolute top level league. And to override these purchase clauses, how much more would you have to pay? Now, I'm not sure if it's quite the same thing. Obviously, the complicated legalese of it probably puts a lot of people off, as well as maybe doubts over whether he's durable at the top level. I think he's the real deal. I do too.
I do too.
They're particularly justified doubts. But it's a little bit, David, like how there's no market for Osimhen this summer, or perhaps more parallel with Undav, there's no market for Victor Gyökeres at the price that he would cost after that one great season with Sporting.
That's the issue that people have, and I think you can use Santi Jimenez at Feyenoord as well as another example. There's quite a few of these strikers actually who are about. You kind of like, they have one big year, and it's a big question for a club to ask. And it's kind of, okay, he's available at that price. He's that age. Do we justify this? Like, can we do that? And I think there's a lot of kind of humming and hawing over whether they can do that, and that is why Gyökeres, that's why Jimenez, these guys haven't gone, because as impressive seasons that they've had, there's perhaps only been one of them. Okay, in Gyökeres' case, he's clearly very, very good at Coventry. He's done well at Sporting as well. I think sometimes people look down on certain leagues as well, and Portugal, Netherlands probably fall into that category of kind of like, do we take a risk on a guy that has had one good season there? And I think that's the situation there it's found there. But look, going back to Undav, very young still, and he was just fantastic in that Stuttgart team, and that Stuttgart team really had no right to finish and where they did that season and be where they were. So he performed extremely well, and he's probably got a good future. But look, he's in a great place for himself, like for all the reasons that Andy has listed. It's a perfect place for a player. You don't need to be angling for a bigger move or to anywhere else.
Even the finish at Real Madrid for that goal it's not a finish that all strikers can do.
No.
I think that the body shape, the way he gets himself into the right spot, it's actually quite artful. It's really good. And that is what, you know, when you think of someone like, this is a big comparison, but you think of someone going back 20 years like Sonny Anderson, for example.
Yeah.
Someone who's a pure penalty box player, but every finish is art. I think Undav kind of falls into that category. Also, what you were saying about the market being as it is at the moment, David, I'm very much looking forward to like a year further down the line when those contracts have run down a little bit. Is there like an absolute striker splurge?
Yeah,
in the market?
I was going to say there might have to be. I still feel it's the most sought after position. I feel like between left centre back and a striker are the two most sought after positions in football.
This from JS. After listening to you talking about the brilliant atmosphere in German stadiums, that would be you, Andy, I was wondering which cities and clubs I should visit as the autumn and winter months start rolling in. So, Andy, as you are the German stadium traveller of OTC, I think you know about this.
Yeah, well, as soon as JS has said winter months, it's made me think of my first trip to see FC Köln, where they have cheerleaders who form a human pyramid before kickoff. And the first time I saw them do this was on a Saturday lunchtime in February, when it was snowing and it was -4. And I mean, that is athletic effort.
Horrible.
But the dedication is unbelievable. Look, Köln is a great example of how many interesting football cultures and how many passionate football cultures that there are there. Köln is a great one to go to. And of course, if you're going to the northwest of Germany, JS, there are so many clubs there. You can go for a weekend and get 2 or 3 games in, which is really important. So Köln, even if they're playing terribly, and last season they were awful, they were still selling out every week. They were selling out their 50,000 plus stadium every week, despite the fact their fans knew that they were going to go there and see an awful team, because the experience is about so much more than that. But yeah, you have Köln, Düsseldorf, Dortmund, Duisburg, Schalke, all within such a close range of each other, and especially actually with Köln being in second tier, because the Bundesliga's 5 games are set at a different time. Like I said, you could fit in a few over the weekend. But of course, the other thing, David, is you could get to Liège in an hour from Köln. So you can't shut out. Like I don't know where you're coming from, JS, but if we're talking about Germany, we could also be talking about Netherlands, Belgium, Poland.
These are great, and the good thing about this is they're great cities for winter football. I'd rather go to them on a dark, cold night than say a July summer evening. In that block of your Germanys, your Polands, Hungary, you know, these places are great winter cities, I always think. And I mean, I've still got, top of my list in regards to Germany, I still really want to go to Dinamo Dresden. And that's where I really go, especially the history of that city. And I'm fascinated by it when I've read about it. So I really want to go there. So that's been number 1 in Germany for some time.
I know I always say this, but Hammarby, you've got to come to Hammarby.
Okay.
In Stockholm.
It's incredible. The ultras there are unbelievable.
Of course. And in fact, they've taken a lot from, I think, English football in terms of, you know, songs and things like that, and the atmosphere has developed, and they've got a really nice stadium as well on top of that for a team that got beaten the other day again. You know, they're not doing badly, and you know, they've got 30,000 fans there every single time.
I think, and just touching on what you said there, I think you'd be surprised how many people and how many clubs, fan groups take their influence from English culture, like traditional English away culture. When I first went to see Sport in Gijón in Asturias, fantastic city, fantastic stadium. And there's a little bar just down the road outside the stadium where everyone always meets, and the ultras are all there. And it was so funny. They were in Burberry hats, beige trench coats, Stone Island, of course, Lacoste, Fred Perry. And it generally looked, I was like, are they shooting a Green Street sequel here or something? It was like they were like head to toe in what they wore in that movie. And it just made me laugh so much. And
I had a similar thing in Braga, actually.
Right, okay, yeah. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, the thing I was going to say about Hammarby and Swedish football support on the whole, it's changed over the 40 years that I've known it. It has changed, and it's become more like the atmospheres that you would see in English football, in all the leagues in English football, by the way. And part of the reason it's changed is because when you look at a culture from the outside, you see things, much more sort of forensically than the people who just go and experience it week after week after week.
For whom it's routine.
So, yes, exactly that point. And when you come to Swedish football in the winter, you've got to be hard to get through it in any case.
Yeah.
But once the singing starts, you can't feel any cold whatsoever. You see the sort of stacks of snow or packed snow, so it's almost ice on the edge of the pitch. You see all of that, but you actually don't think that it's winter. It's a weird thing.
Well, you're melting it with your pyro, right?
I was going to say, you got pyro, you got a load of bodies around you, hot food, beer in you. You genuinely don't feel it. Yeah.
I think that's it. Thank you for listening to Ask OTC. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotun, at Andy Brassel, at David Jacker, or at OTC Pod. You can email us otc@footballramble.com.